Hey y'all, what's up? You guys good? Yeah, thanks for coming out at 10:30 to my little university lecture on UI 101, right? So you guys have your notebooks? No one writes these days, anyways. So welcome to UI 101. I hope you guys are enjoying Orlando so far. We have the sun, we have the rain, humidity. I love that. But before we get started, a little introduction of myself. I'm Joey. I'm a UX designer on UEFN. I work on the designs for most of the tools and features that come into UEFN, but one of our main specialties is UI tools. So that's UI devices, UMG, so on and so forth. I come from a background in technical UI design at a small game studio. So I came from an Unreal background, moving into UEFN after. I look at all of your UIs that you post on socials, any of the pretty stuff, the ones that don't look that pretty, but I still send them anyways to my team because y'all are doing great stuff in your games, and we really like to see what you guys do with our tools. So please continue sharing them, and we really like to look at these things. So I see some people filling in. Welcome. So this talk's about UMG. If you don't know what that is, you're in the right place. If you know what it is, you're also in the right place. If you're an expert at it, maybe you're not in the right place. But yeah. Okay, so let's get right into it. You've probably come to this point at some point in your game development cycle where you're making your mechanics, you're doing your systems, you're building your level, and you just want to take a break, right? And you want to move on to something else different in your game. And you ask this question. I need to make UI. Okay, how, right? Because in UEFN, there's so many different concepts in making UI, right? We can use devices, we can use some black hole called UMG because we don't know what UMG is. View models, cool. What's view models? No one knows. UI materials, yeah. We can use verse, cool. But verse can be intimidating sometimes, right? And so this talk, we're aiming to cover the first three things, which is some parts of devices, a lot of UMG, and just the basics of view models. We won't be covering UI materials and verse UI because if you're interested in that, please go to Derek Diaz's talk down the hall right after this. He's going to be touching on advanced techniques for developing UI and UEFN. So if you're more interested in that side, go to his talk right after that. It's a UI day today. So yeah. As I mentioned, this is what we're going to be talking about. Some things on device. We're going to be introducing devices first, then telling you guys what UMG is and how to make your best of UMG. We're going to be touching a bit on view models and view bindings, and lastly, how they all come together through what we call UI devices. Okay, now let's take the few concepts that we've been talking about into these little bubbles, right? There's so many concepts of developing UI right now inside UMG and in UEFN that sometimes it can be hard to understand how they all link up to each other. So let's put it in a little better diagram, right? So I'm going to go through each one of them as we move on throughout this talk. So I'll be showing this diagram again. So, it's not a one-time slide. Don't worry about it. But first, let's talk about devices. Devices are your gameplay logic. If anyone's not too familiar with devices are basically your basic building block that we provide you with in UEFN. Epic makes tons of devices that contain little snippets and little bits of gameplay logic to get you started quickly in your game. And this can include really simple mechanics to really complex tracking systems that help you bring your game ideas to life. There's tons of them in UEFN. Please go try them out. They're all really easy to get started with. An example of a device is a tracker device. This is a simple tracking system that lets you track some form of stat, like eliminations or your score in the game. And not each device, but some devices come with default UI like the one on the top left. That's a really nifty UI that shows the name of the tracker, the description for this tracker, the tracker icon, and the progress that this tracker's currently tracking, right? It does the job. It's simple, minimalistic. It could fit into any kind of game that you use it in. The issue with this is that, it's if you want to make something more immersive and something more than just a flat UI, you can't really do much with what we provide you with, right? Because devices are missing one key aspect: complex customization. Devices do a lot of things, but they don't do one specialty really well, right? We give you your UI to get started off, but if you want to do more than that, that's a bit tough for what we give you with. And so that's where UMG comes in. So UMG provides the in-game interface part. So by in-game interface, I mean UMG is a tool that lets you create UI for UI to display to your players inside the game, right? So let's dive a bit deeper into what UMG is. UMG is also short form for Unreal Motion Graphics. It's the design tool that we use in UEFN and inside UE as well to create UI layouts using what we call user widgets. To get started in UMG, you go to your content browser, you right-click in it, you hover over user interface, and you get to see widget blueprint. For the remainder of this talk, we'll be referring to widget blueprints as user widgets. There's a slight differentiation between both, but I won't be covering that. If you're interested in it, like, look for me after this talk, I'll tell you all about it. But whenever I mention user widgets, I'm referring to the file that you're creating in the content browser. So once you open your user widget, you'll get into what we call the UMG editor. This cool thing with a cool fish, because fishes are cool. So I'd like you to imagine you're a painter, you have a blank canvas in front of you, you have a palette of colors, right? You have a paintbrush, you're ready to start being an artist, being the next generational talent in art, right? Cool. Using that same anecdote, this middle portion with the fish and the waves, that's your viewport. That is your blank canvas that you are going to be constructing your UI on. And that means that whatever you're painting, you're going to be using this viewport to construct your UI in. On the left, we literally have a palette. That's your collection of colors, your collection of what we call widgets. And this is basically all the components that you need to build your UI. It's a box of building blocks that you can start dragging and dropping into your viewport to start making your UI look in any way you want. And these include things like text, images, things we call panels, which we'll touch on later, so on and so forth. On the bottom is your hierarchy, and this is where you can see how your widgets are organized and layered, whether it's on top or bottom, whether it's grouped in a panel or not. This is essentially how you layer your colors on the blank canvas, right? You want to layer blue on top of red, red on top of green if you want to. This is the hierarchy and what its purpose serves. On your right is your details panel. Whenever you select a widget inside your hierarchy or your viewport, all the properties for that widget appears on the details panel. And so this is similar to what if you want to apply texture to a color that you just painted. You want to make it look a bit rough. You want to make it look a bit glossy, matte. That's what you're going to be finding on this right portion here. And last but not least, this is one thing that, of course, doesn't happen in painting. You can't make things come to life, but you can do it in UMG, which is the UI animation sequencer. If you click on the button on the bottom that says animations, this little panel comes up, and this is where you can start animating your UI to create more interesting visual states and concepts. And this is very similar to the sequencer that you can find inside UEFN or inside UE as well. So the tools are pretty much shared across different platforms in this case. So that's like a really basic introduction to the UMG editor, right? Then that's really all you need to get comfortable with exploring what the editor is about. So let's dive into the meat of this presentation, which is widgets. So widgets are essentially at its core a UI element that can either present and organize information or make your UI interactable through things like buttons or sliders. And I like to categorize widgets into two categories, and they are content widgets and layout widgets. So let's dive right into that. Content widgets essentially let you display content using assets that you bring into your content browser onto your UI, and content widgets also take up layout space. You'll probably be hearing this concept of layout space a ton throughout this presentation, so layout space is exactly what it means. It's the amount of space that a widget takes up inside your UI. So if my text is this long, this is how much space that it's going to take up inside on my screen, right? If I'm making a menu with my text this long, this is how much space my text is taking up. Remember this concept because we're going to be switching this layout space up a bit, quite a bit later on. These are the 3 content widgets which are extremely useful for, I want to say, 99% of use cases that you need in UEFN because these are images, text, and a widget switcher. So let's get an example to help illustrate how this is used, right? So I have this nifty health bar widget that we have showing on the bottom left of the screen. A player would see this when they're in game. Then this widget is used to track, number 1, your health, which is the green bar that's in a circle with the text in the middle that says 100, that's the player's current health, and the player's shield, which is that orange bar on the right. So if we take a look at this widget inside UMG, an image block is used to display either a texture or a material. And an example of this is the black frame that appears on the back. There's a texture that we create in the tool called Figma. And this is a texture because it doesn't need to be dynamically updated according to what's happening in the game. You need it for decorative purposes. You need it as a background for your player health, your player shields, and the health number. And so we use an image block to bring in a texture that we exported from Figma into a UEFN. And that allows us to display it inside UMG. On the other hand, that health bar, the green radial bar that's circling this frame that we talked about, that's a health bar material. And materials essentially let you dynamically update based on what's happening in your game. So as the player's gaining or losing health inside your game, this radial health bar increases or decreases depending on that. So image blocks are really useful for displaying both of them. They are really versatile in any use case that you want. Yeah. Now moving on to text block, I'm not going to cover too much of text block because this is essentially what it is. It is text. The health numbers in the middle, that 100, that is a text block. And there are many customizable settings in text block, such as the type of font that you're using, the font weight, spaces between letters, so on and so forth. And this text can be dynamically updated based on the player's current health as well. So as you lose health, as you take damage, or you gain health, this text updates as well. So let's go through the third useful content widget, which is, I think, pretty underrated right now and is pretty versatile in my opinion too. And this is the widget switcher. So the widget switcher lets you cycle between groups of widgets that are contained inside it. And so if I have, let's say, 5 widgets inside my widget switcher, I can switch between the first widget to the third widget to the 5th widget, depending on what my game is about, right? So to show this, let me show an example. So I'm walking up to a button to show a UI, and in this menu, there's 2 tabs. Clicking on tab 1 shows some content for tab 1. Tab 2 shows some content for tab 2, right? If we take a look at this inside UMG, we can see that all of the content for tab 1 and tab 2 is located inside a widget switcher. And basically, I'm using a property called the active widget index on the widget switcher to cycle between both of them. So an active widget index is basically similar to an array. It starts at 0, which means I want to point to the widget in the first position. And that is my content in tab 1. If I switch it to 1, it goes to content for tab 2. And so you can imagine how useful this can be, not even just for menus, but also if I want to display different states on my player's health. If I'm eliminated, I want to show a little skull icon on my health bar. I can use a widget switcher for that to swap in the skull icon, and when I respawn, I can swap it out again if I wanted to. So those are your 3 really basic and simple content widgets that you really need to start off with in UMG, right? But content widgets aren't going to do much for you if you don't use what we call layout widgets. Layout widgets, also known as containers. I'm going to be switching back and forth between them throughout this presentation. So yeah. Layout widgets essentially let you organize the content widgets that we saw just now to show on the UI using a set of rules that are unique to each layout widget. While content widgets take up layout space, layout widgets manipulate layout space. So if my text block is taking up this amount of space, if I use a specific layout widget to manipulate it a bit, it can take up this amount of space, but my text is still this long. So that's essentially what layout widgets do for you. So there's 3 really common layout widgets that everyone should know about when trying to get started in UMG, and that is the overlay, stack box, and grid panel. To illustrate this example, here's another really fun example. Our artist made this really cool drawer art that shows the rewards that you received after completing a mission or a quest. And it has a nice yellow banner on top with some text on the bottom and 3 tokens on the bottom as well. So an overlay essentially lets you layer widgets on top of one another, right? I have a drawer background that looks a bit wooden there. I have the content of the drawer itself. If I use an overlay with them, it looks like this. Simple concept to understand, right? And to start basically organizing these widgets in my overlay, I can use a hierarchy to determine whether one thing's on top, one thing's on the bottom, or vice versa. And if we take a look at this widget inside UMG, you can see exactly that the content of the drawer is overlaid on top of the drawer background. Pretty simple layout widget, right? But it covers a good amount of use cases that you need. The next useful widget is a stack box. A stack box essentially allows you to order your widgets either horizontally left to right or vertically top to bottom. And the easiest way to visualize this are the 3 tokens in the middle. It's nothing fancy. I just laid out the first icon, second icon, and third icon inside a stack box, and that's it. The one I like to really cover is grid panels. And so grid panels are a heavily underappreciated widget, not only UEFN, but UE as well. And grid panel is, it is a confusing layout widget. The name's grid panel, it lets you create a grid, sure. That's its main purpose, right? But there are some hidden properties inside a grid panel that are uniquely to it that lets you really customize how your UI widgets look in terms of layering and positioning. So let's take a look at it. If we look at this, this paper background with the 3 tokens and the text and button on top of it, that's all housed in the grid panel. I could use an overlay for it because that's what we want, right? We just want to overlay the tokens, text, and whatnot on top of a paper background. But I want it to be offset just a bit to the top to give that effect of it hovering above the paper background. And so I could do that with a grid panel using these 2 properties called layer and nudge. So I've set the tokens, the text in the background to be on layer 1, while the paper background is on layer 0 to ensure that it always appears on top. And then I nudged it about 50 pixels up. In this case, you're seeing negative 48.96 and something. But that's it being nudged up just above the paper background. And this doesn't affect your layout space at all. Another really simple example is a drop shadow for my drawer. I could use an overlay as well, sure, but I'm not going to be able to see my drop shadow appear just below the drawer, right? So I use a grid panel again, use my layers and use my nudges to ensure that the drop shadow appears just below the drawer background. And so you could use these for a variety of things, and we have a couple more examples coming up to show you how to use grid panels. So to get you started off with, these are really the 6 widgets that you really need to keep in mind when you're developing in UMG, when you're getting started and you're not sure where to go, right? You can use an image, text block, or widget switcher to display your content and cycle through them from assets in your content browser, but in addition to that, use layout widgets such as overlay, stack boxes, and grid panels to start manipulating and creating pretty unique layouts for your UI. But I'm giving you these 6 widgets, but you're going to be dragging stuff around. But how do I even start making my UI in UMG, right? There's so many principles out there. How do I get started even doing the thing? And so these are Joey's hot tips for how to succeed in UMG. So I like to follow 3 principles of developing UI in UMG. The first is using the right containers and keeping it simple, because UMG is inherently a really complex tool, and every layout widget, like containers we saw just now, they all have their own unique purposes in how they lay out content widgets. And so content widgets always follow the rules of their layout widgets. So let's take a look at a couple examples to see, when should we use which layout widget for what scenario, right? Let's talk about layering. So we had overlays, right? Overlays let you organize your widgets top to bottom using the hierarchy. That's a really simple concept that most people understand. But this is really simple, and if you want something a bit more than that, if you want to specify, I want 2 widgets on the same layers, but I want to make sure that that's on the very bottom and not the top, an overlay doesn't really do it for me. And so I use a grid panel. If you can see, there's a couple of sparkles around, but they're overlaid on top of the sign. Some's underneath the sign. I have like that orange bar that's overlaid on top of everything else. I have the diamond that's overlaying some sparkles on the back as well. A grid panel lets you do that. If you need more functionality than just top to bottom, you want to specifically customize the layering of specific widgets inside your UI, a grid panel is one of the best ways to do that. And it gives you additional positioning properties as well. My sparkles offset all the way outside to the corners, to the bottom, to the left, so on and so forth. Let's talk about ordering. So another really common use case in creating a UI is that I want to start ordering my widgets either in a grid, or I want to make it left to right, top to bottom, and whatnot. We've talked about stack boxes. It lets you do really basic, simple, and vertical ordering, right? One thing I didn't mention about stack boxes is that the spacing between the elements inside stack box can be unequal. And so I've set a spacing between the first 2 to be 50 pixels, and then 30 pixels, and then 10. But if I want to make a grid of, let's say, 25 items, I don't want to set paddings for each one of these items, right? It's such a hassle to update if someone tells me that, oh crap, we need to increase the pixels by 5 for each. Do I want to click through each one of them to do that? No, right? And that's where a uniform grid panel comes in. This is not to be confused with the grid panel. Okay, this is a totally different widget. But what a uniform grid panel does is, this lets you also create a grid, but the unique property that it has is that you can apply a padding to each one of these child elements in there. So if I've defined 40 pixels of padding for each child element, every child element that I add inside a uniform grid panel will have 40 pixels of padding. And so this saves me the trouble of going through each one of them, applying padding to each, or removing it if I want to. This just saves 10, 15 minutes of my time, right? The next example is scaling. I'm pretty sure I've seen lots of people struggle with how to scale things up, whether it's images, whether it's text, whether it's even the container itself. There are 2 main widgets that we could use for scaling in UMG, and I didn't cover these in the common layout widgets, but these are a bit more on the intermediate side of UMG, where a size box allows you to scale your widgets non-proportionally. And so this means that I could scale it and make it a rectangle. I can make it a box. I can make it really long but not wide. And that's because they have properties called override and min and max, which applies to the height and width of the widget. While if I want proportional scaling, let's say I want to keep my rectangle rectangular as it scales up in screen size, I could use a scale box. And applying widgets in a scale box lets me scale it up according to the aspect ratio that I want. And if we look at this example, I have my size box limited to a maximum height, and so even if I scale it up, the height remains the same. But you notice that the width is changing as a result, but the scale box is still maintaining its aspect ratio as you scale it up. So that's principle number 1, keep it simple, right? And that's going to be a really common theme as we move through this presentation, in that keeping it simple is always the way to go in UMG. The second principle that I like to follow is a really simple one, but also really important to understanding how containers work inside UMG, in that your layout widgets will always size to what's the largest content inside of it. So in this scenario, I have 2 diamond thingies, right? One's at 128 pixels, the other is double its size. As I scaled my image up, we can see that the container also scaled up as a result, right? And in isolation, this can look fine, like that's a really simple concept to understand, right? Now, what happens if I put it with other widgets like this? We can see that the 2 smaller diamond images are maintaining their own squares in there, but the larger one is taking up so much space. And if I use this with other widgets inside my screen, on my UI screens, that's going to impact the layout of other widgets inside it as well. So this is a really small principle to keep in mind, but also really important to ensuring that you don't get frustrated by how your UI is moving around or how it's being affected by just an image blowing up like this. And my third and actually favorite principle for UMG, which is, I think, probably more important than the first, than keeping it simple, is alignment. This is the one thing that I find folks don't normally do in UEFN or don't prioritize in UEFN, but alignment helps your widget scale up or down and maintain its position when your screen size goes up, your screen size goes down on mobile devices or TVs. It ensures that your widgets are anchored and aligned to a specific position inside your UI. So every single widget in UMG has these two settings, horizontal alignment and vertical alignment. In this scenario, this diamond image is center aligned on the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. If I set it to fill, this fills the whole container. And so as my container scales up, this diamond image will scale up as well. And so understanding this concept means that my diamond image, which was originally 128 pixels, is going to look extremely blurry if I blow it up to a larger widget than this, right? And if we take a look at a widget with even more variations than just a diamond, there's text, there's the large background behind. These widgets are currently aligned, the text block on the top left, the other one on the bottom right, and the diamond in the center. And so keeping these alignments, if we take a look at this little video here, as my widget scales up, it's going to be anchored to the same corners as well. And so this is a really simple example, but as you scale your UI up and create more complex widgets, alignment becomes even more important because your widgets might not be sizing perfectly as you scale up, or it might just be clashing with each other as it scales down. And so that's where alignment comes in that, it helps you with what we call responsive design, which is design that adapts to different screen sizes. So these aren't the only 3 principles of working in UMG. There's a ton more, but I find that to get started with, keeping these 3 in mind as you start exploring the tool really goes a long way in doing so. Okay, some rapid fire tips. I'm going to go and spend like 10 seconds on each tip. So this is an active listening test, okay? There's a quiz later, by the way. I'm kidding. Okay, first one. We know that padding adds space between elements, but did you know that negative padding removes space between elements? You cannot drag the slider to a negative value, so try typing a negative value inside padding. That removes space between widgets. Next one, we've seen this drop down on the top right of our UMG viewport, a fill screen button. Most people don't really understand what it's for, but all you need to know is that fill screen lets you preview your widget on how it looks on a screen, while desire lets you preview your widget as its actual size. And so depending on your use case, whether, are you designing your widget by itself, use desired. If you want to preview it to see how it looks like on the mobile screen, on the TV screen, use fill screen. Next, screen size. Following up with that, there's this nifty 2-way arrow on the bottom right of every widget in UMG, and a little drop down on the top right that says screen size. This lets you test how your UI looks on different screens. You can drag that arrow and increase the screen size to see how your UI looks on a bigger screen or smaller screen, or you can pick from pre-selected screen sizes that we provide you with using that drop down. The fourth is wrap and replace with. If you find yourself deep in your widget hierarchy with 20, 30 widgets inside UMG, and you're wondering that, crap, I need to make a change. Do I just create a new one? No. Go to your hierarchy, right-click on the widgets you'd like to replace or add something to it. Wrap with allows you to wrap your widgets inside a layout widget, while replace with lets you replace that widget either with a layout widget or its children inside. Cool. So I've told you guys what you should do in UMG, but here's what not to do in UMG. And there's 3 things here. The first is a bloated hierarchy. Second, canvas panels. That's a fun one. And third, render transforms. So let's go deeper into it. So a bloated hierarchy. Let's say we have this simple diamonds collected widget on the right. It tracks how many diamonds a player has collected using the tracker device we've mentioned just now. It's nothing fancy. does the job, but it looks pretty, right? I could either set up my widget this way. 2 canvas panels, 3 size boxes. It works, right? Yeah, does the job. Or I could use the same 3 common layout widgets I've told you about and organize it this way. Your future self would thank you if you keep your hierarchy simplified. Your other devs won't be screaming at you at 3 a.m. saying, why are you keeping 5 canvas panels in your widgets? You don't need that. Keep things simple. Follow principle 1 of UMG. You don't need to complicate things if you don't need to. And now let's tell a story about canvas panels and why we should not use that many canvas panels. I see some heartbreaks in the audience here. I see you, Ian. So let's say we take that same bloated hierarchy example. We have our text there, right? And we want to just change it to canvas panels because, hey, canvas panels are pretty simple to use, right? You can just drag stuff around. You can resize the boxes for canvas panels. Yeah, it's intuitive, right? Yeah, cool. Let's try it. So I want to change my layout and move the 0, 10 value all the way to the right. I want to resize my diamonds collected text box to make sure it actually fits. It actually matches how much space that my text is taking. But I'm realizing that once I start dragging stuff around, the container size is changing too much. You see the box moving around. My text is there. My container is there. How do you explain that? Canvas panels. Canvas panels give you a really terrible representation of your UI in that, it gives you the illusion that, hey, this is really easy to use. Let me drag stuff around. But once you start dragging stuff around, this happens. But that's not to say canvas panels are entirely useless, right? There's specific use cases for them where it becomes really useful. Canvas panels are especially really good for anchoring elements to different parts of your screen. Let's take that tab example that we talked about just now. I have my tab menu in there. I have some images on the top left. I have one on the middle right. And I want it to appear this exact way on my UI. And so what do? I use a canvas panel to do that. A canvas panel has these little flowers that appear on your widget. And so that shows which part of the screen that is anchored to. So that one's on the top left. The one on the left is on top left, in the middle, centered, on the right, middle right. And that's all done using this nifty little drop-down inside the canvas panel, where there's even more options like fill the whole screen on the bottom right, or fill just the right side of your screen. So canvas panels allow you these options, but for the most part, we try to avoid canvas panels in our UI because down the road, my future self is just going to hate me on what I did 6 months ago. Let's talk about render transforms and how to actually use them. So we're going to take that same diamonds collected widget, and let's say we want to offset that diamond icon all the way out of our widget, right? And one way to do that is render transforms. Because how render transforms work is that's how much layout space that my image is taking up, but I want to make sure that whatever's rendered, that in this case, the diamond icon, is pushed out of that layout space. And so this means that my layout space is not affected at all if I move this out, right? So seems like a useful tool, right? See some heads nodding there, You've probably used it at some point. I know you. So this is all done using this option here. Not only transforming, you can scale it up as well. You can share it to make it look, warped and distorted, or you can rotate it as well. It's really useful, right? Now let's show it in action. Yeah, I'm just moving it all the way to the left, super simple, does the job, right? Now, let's take it even further. I made my widget into this thing using the same exact widgets that I had just now. I turned my blue background into a thin blue line. I increased the size of my diamond and moved it all the way up. Diamond's up, blue line's all the way to the right. My values just shifted down, right? Hey, render transforms are super useful. Why do I need to care about all the widgets that Joey has been talking about, right? Who cares? But if I start using it with other widgets, this is what happens. I'm definitely sure that I'm going to be reusing this diamonds collected widget over and over again, right? Why if I don't want to collect diamonds, I want to collect wood or something? There are going to be multiples of these widgets on screen, and once it stacks up, the layout space is messed up, right? And so that means that you're going to end up with a scenario like this where they are going to be overlapping with one another all the time. So render transforms are situational in some cases. Not to say they're entirely useless, but we should know when to use them as well. They're really good for offsetting individual elements like this. If you want multiple elements, sure, do that as well. Or you want to rotate stuff and offset it too, go ahead. And so the one main use case that's really good for render transforms are UI animations. So if I want to animate something moving around the screen, you want that 0-10 text to, I don't know, fly into the player's face and scale up and smack them in the face and make it disappear. You don't want to be just changing the actual transform of this text by itself because your UI is going to get really messed up. So that's where we use render transforms, for example. Okay, that was a lot. Wow. So that was UMG and widgets. We've talked about devices, we've talked about widgets, UMG, but we've never talked about how do we connect widgets to devices, right? What is the middle person between all of that? What's the bridge that connects, that brings the data from devices all the way to our UI, to display it on our UI, right? And that's where view models and view bindings come in. View models are, at its very core and the basic level, a list of properties from your device that are curated by us that can be used in your UI. And this is essentially a huge list of variables from each device that you can use to start binding to your UI. And we bind it through view bindings. View bindings let you bind your view model properties to specific properties in your widgets. And as these properties in your view model update, they fire calls that update the properties on your widgets as well. And so that's where we can update values on our UI. That's where we can pass text into it as well. So to start accessing these in UMG, if we go to that little window icon, window menu on the top, we see view bindings and view models. Cool, really simple. And we get met with these two huge gray scary panels, right? And that's empty and there's nothing in them. So let's start with view model because view bindings need a view model to get started with, right? If you click that plus view model on top, and you get hit with this list of all the view models that we're providing you with. And if you click on one of them, you get to see those are the properties that are present inside a view model. And that's my list of view models on the left. And in this case, I'm showing the example of the tracker device's view model that I've been talking about since the beginning. There's a couple of really useful properties in here that comes from the tracker device, such as you can see the value, target value of the tracker icon, some other related things like color, description, so on and so forth. And so once you add it to your view model panel, this appears. Cool, you're ready to get started doing view bindings. To get started using view bindings, just select any widget that you want to start binding to in UMG. And if you look in your view bindings panel, that plus add widget button updates with the name of that widget as well. And so I'm not going to go through how to create a view binding right now, but something magically happens here and you get met with this. So let's talk about the anatomy of a view binding, because this is where I think people get really confused about why is the arrow going from right to left? Because we read left to right, right? Why are there 4 boxes that I can customize here? What do these things do, right? So the top little header is your binding widget. That is the widget that you like to start binding to. That can be a text block, that can be an image, that can be a container as well if you want to. The box on the left is your widget property, and that is basically what property inside the widget that you're binding to that you would like to pass data into. So inside my text block, there are various properties such as my text property, visibility, so on and so forth. On the right is a property that you like to bind to your widget property. And this can be from a view model. It can be from other widgets as well, or something we call a conversion function, which I won't be touching in this talk too, because that's a can of worms. Lastly, that middle arrow, binding flow. I won't be touching that as well, because that's another huge bucket of worms that requires a whole nother talk to go through. So knowing the basic concepts of these different parts of view bindings, how I like to tell people is that we can easily relate this to what we see in the details panel. So on the left, I'm referring to the text property inside the text block, and you can find these properties when you select a text block inside UMG, in that, that's text on the right. Other properties inside that same list, such as, let's see, color and opacity, shadow color, that can easily be binded to as well inside view bindings. On the device side, if we look at the details panel for a tracker device, we can see that the property called name in the tracker view model corresponds with the tracker title property inside there as well. You notice that there are other properties in there that, kind of look vaguely familiar from the view model that we just looked at, such as target value, starting value, description text. And so once you start making these associations, you can start telling us which properties that you guys would like to bind to in various devices that you put in your level. Okay, that is the overall relationship. We're all clear with the 3 different parts of custom UI inside UEFN using devices, right? We have devices that provide gameplay logic. We have the view models that act as a bridge, the middle person between UMG and devices. And lastly, we have UMG that creates the widgets for these devices to use. So bring it all together, we have UI devices. UI devices are essentially devices that have a view model attached to them. And this is the current list of devices that we have, which have a view model right now, and that means that you can create custom UI for all of these devices. I urge you all to do them. If you haven't tried this out yet, go home to UEFN, pull up UEFN, try things out in UMG and start attaching them to these devices, because we have tons of properties for each device for you to play with and to show different types of data for your player. So let's go ahead and start using the same tracker device and pull up a custom UI for it. So I'm placing my tracker device, looking for the widget I just made. Cool. I'm setting the title on my tracker device. This is my tracker. Yeah, simple. And then once I launch my session, I get to see the tracker device in my game right there. I have a couple of glass pyramids. Imagine they're diamonds. We don't have diamonds. So the same widget that we saw appears on the top left. And once I start collecting these glass pyramids, the progress increases as well. And once I complete, it just fades away. And that's a functionality that comes with tracker devices, in that once you complete something, it plays an animation and just disappears. And every device that we provide you with in UEFN does the same thing as well, in that you can apply your custom UI, but the behavior of that UI and when it appears on screen, when it appears away from the screen, all inherits the same. So to recap, these are the 5 major concepts of just developing UI in UEFN today. We've talked about devices, UMG, and a bit of view models, and nothing at all on UI materials and Verse UI, because Derek's talk is happening right after this. Again, plugging Derek's talk. He's somewhere in this room. I don't see him, but go to his talk right after this. You're going to be learning about some Verse UI, some more about view models if you'd like to know about that. Everything that you see here today is also available in the user interfaces feature example, available for free on UEFN. The team worked really hard on this to provide you with materials and textures you could drag and drop into your project. And so there's a QR code you could scan to learn more about it. We also give you really cool examples of how we've used all the widgets and all the materials that we're providing you with as well. So at the start of this talk, this question popped up, in that I need to make UI. How do I do it, right? And if I want to use UMG, how do I get started, right? But I hope with some of the things that I gave you today, you're a bit more ready to get started building UI in UMG. Thanks.